In Chapter 13 of David Copperfield, David walks to Dover, selling his waistcoat and jacket on the way in order to buy food, and he sleeps outdoors, under haystacks and in parks. At one point, he's accosted by a belligerent tinker who demands his money, and then steals David's silk handkerchief. After 6 days, David arrives at Miss Betsy's cottage in Dover. Bedraggled and exhausted, he introduces himself to his aunt, who is working in her garden. After telling her about his journey, he bursts into tears. Miss Betsy questions him about his history and shares her observations with Mr. Dick, who lives upstairs. Referring to David's mother as the poor baby, she rails against Clara Copperfield's decision to marry Mr. Murdstone and complains because Clara hadn't provided David with a sister named Betsy Trotwood. David senses Miss Betsy is beginning to feel sympathy for him, but their talk is interrupted when Miss Betsy jumps up to chase donkeys away from her front lawn. That night, before David falls asleep on clean white sheets, he hopes and resolves to never forget the homeless, and he hopes to never be homeless again himself. In Chapter 14 of David Copperfield, Miss Betsy tells David she has contacted Mr. Murdstone the following morning, and David fears she'll send him back to his hated guardian. Mr. Dick tells David he's writing a memorial or autobiography, but he has to keep rewriting it because references to the beheading of King Charles I keep creeping into his writing. Mr. Dick has constructed a huge kite from his discarded manuscript pages, which he says will take the facts a long way. Miss Betsy explains that Mr. Dick is eccentric but harmless. She took him in 10 years ago when his family wanted to put him in an asylum. She's long since learned to value his advice. The next day, the Murdstones arrive at the cottage. Miss Betsy questions them and tells them directly she thinks they bullied David's mother, took advantage of her youth and innocence, and shamefully mistreated David, then angrily chases the Murdstones out of the house. Miss Betsy declares she and Mr. Dick will be joint guardians of David, and that she'll change his name to Trotwood Copperfield. David feels grateful. His time at Murdstone and Grinby's warehouse is now over. In Chapter 15 of David Copperfield, David settles in at the cottage, enjoying the company of Mr. Dick, while gaining the approval of Miss Betsy, who calls him Trot. He's delighted when she suggests he should go to school in nearby Canterbury. The next day, they set off to Canterbury, where Miss Betsy consults her lawyer and financial manager, Mr. Wickfield, about the best school for David. Mr. Wickfield recommends Dr. Strong's school. It's decided David will board in his house while attending the school. Mr. Wickfield, a widower, looks after his daughter, Agnes Wickfield, who's about David's age. David is pleased with his new room and new situation, except for one thing, more specifically, one person, Uriah Heep, a red-haired, shifty boy who comes in every day to do clerical work in Wickfield's office.